Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be thinking about how to harmonise a descending scale in a bass line using suspensions, and in particular using 7/6 suspensions. So let's just unpack that title a little bit and then we'll get straight to the nub of the matter. Why am I interested in sharing with you some thoughts on harmonising a descending scale in a bass? Because it's something that quite a bit of trouble is experienced by people literally just trying to do that. It's one thing to harmonise a scale that's at the top of your texture. It's a slightly harder thing to harmonise a scale that's in the bass. Even when it's in the bass, it's slightly easier to harmonise an ascending scale than it is a descending scale. So how do you fix that? Well, one solution is never to harmonise a descending scale. But then, that's a pity that you kind of make that kind of decision, because there are times in music where you think, actually, this really wants a descending scale. How can I deliver that really effectively? So here we have a descending scale of C major in the bass. So you could harmonise that by just putting a load of root position chords on top of that. Just put 5/3 chords on every single bass note. But as you probably already realised, and you can certainly hear it now, what's that giving us? A load of consecutive fifths, parallel fifths. And as soon as you go into 4 parts, you'll also have a load of parallel octaves. And these are things we try to avoid because they don't make for good harmonic progression. So is there a way we can kind of get around that? Well, what I'm going to propose here is an interesting little technique that uses chains of 7/6 suspensions. Now, suspensions, hopefully you've come across suspensions. If you haven't, we've got lots of video material that is covering that topic. But in a suspension, you have to do 3 things. You have to be prepared, you have to sound a note, and you have to resolve it. So PSR. So prepare, sound, resolve. The note for P, for prepare, is the same as the note for sound. Okay, the note from sound goes to resolve by step, nearly always downward. So you get one note, the same note again, and then you go down a note. That's how the pattern works. There are 2 chords. The first note, P, belongs to the first chord, and the last note of this sequence, R, belongs to the second chord. The second note, S, is dissonant with the second chord, but it's hanging over from the previous chord, the chord that fitted with the P. So that's how a suspension works. When we talk about 7/6 suspensions, we're talking about what's happening over a bass line. So if I show you that in this example, this note is a P, it's there, it belongs to the first chord, it's a kind of A minor chord. Then it doesn't belong when it's still sounding here, because this is now a G major chord and A doesn't fit with that. So it's dissonant, but it's sustained from P. So it's the same note. You can repeat the note or you can sustain it. Then it's going to go by step, usually downwards, which is what happens when we get to this note. So P belongs to its chord, R belongs to its chord, because in this case R is G and it belongs to a G major chord. S is a note that doesn't belong to the chord, so that A doesn't belong to a G major chord. But you have to do these 3 steps, P, S, R. And this note, A, when it occurs at the point of S, is a 7th above that bass note, and it moves to 6 above that bass note. So you've got A going to G, a 7th followed by a 6 above the bass note. So we call it a 7/6 suspension. And then what happens is that we carry on in what we call a sequence. So when you just keep doing the same pattern over and over again, that's what we're doing here. So then we get another 7/6 suspension here. Prepare, sound, resolve. So you see how that goes. You might also notice that resolve on the first sequence was doubling up as prepare on the second sequence. So we've got PSR, 7 going to 6. And then we carry on the same again. So now we've got PSR, and you can see again, it's going 7, 6. So then we have another one that's going PSR, 7, 6. So you see how this little sequence works out. And you can sort of see the upper parts tracking the bass. This middle part, which has got nothing to do with the suspensions, is just tracking the bass a third higher, or an octave and a third higher in this case. And then I've got a whole series of 7/6 suspensions at the top. It makes it slightly more interesting than doing this without the suspensions. I mean, you might just say, well, why do you have to have suspensions? You don't have to. I could just go simple chords like this. Sounds perfectly all right. Just doesn't sound terribly engaging, I suppose. But if I put these suspensions in, you'll immediately hear how it makes it sound more interesting. Now you can decorate that in some way, but just having these suspensions, you sort of feel we've started on a chord, oh, something's moved before we go on to the next chord. Then you feel this dissonance that then resolves. We prepare, we have another dissonance that resolves. So you see how that's kind of making an interesting kind of series of musical tensions and releases as we go down the scale. It almost sort of slightly hides the scale, doesn't it? And you can decorate this if you want to in some way. Now, of course, what you could also do is decide to have the part with the suspensions in the middle voice. I mean, I'm giving you an example in 3 parts here. And then just have this, what was the middle voice before, having this descending scale as the upper voice. So the original one sounds like this. And the version with the top 2 parts switched upside down goes like this. So you can hear how that just makes it a bit more interesting than just going through, you know, the playing chords. And then if you want to do some elaboration, you see how you could do something like that in the top part, or you could have the bass moving somewhere. You know, you can make this more complicated, but the great thing about thinking it this way is you start off with just thinking, I'm going to write a descending bass line. In this case, it fills up 4 bars or 4 measures. I'm going to work out what my kind of basic chords are going to be. And then I'm thinking, oh, actually, these 7/6 suspensions work quite well. And you see kind of what the basic chords are. We're alternating root position with a first inversion. So root there, root, root, and then I just switch it round at the end to finish off. First inversion, first inversion, first inversion, switch it round. And so that's the basic kind of chord scheme. And then you can paint these 7/6 suspensions onto it, either in the upper voice or the middle voice if you're in 3 parts, or if you're in 4 parts where you've got more options. It's just a reasonably simple way of generating a 4-bar sequence, a 4-measure sequence, you know, a pattern of notes that's just playing out that might add a bit of interest to a composition, that might be quite useful when you're wanting to glue one corner to another. You know, you've kind of written your musical ideas, now you know what you're going to do next, but you're not quite sure what to stick in between. So actually this kind of sequence can be quite effective. But there are many places where you do end up wanting to harmonize a descending scale. And lots of people that I've taught over the years have had difficulty doing that. So when that descending scale comes in the bass, here's just one idea. There are lots of other possibilities, but here's just one idea. Alternating root position with first inversion chords, flicking round at the end, then saying, I wonder if I can make these 7/6 suspensions work. If you can make all of that happen, then decide how you're going to elaborate things to get something that is melodically satisfying as well and makes for an interesting texture, because maybe you elaborate the top part in this measure, this bar, then you elaborate the middle part or the bass part in the next bar or the next measure. So it just becomes a bit more conversational in the texture. But it's an idea you can play with and get to where you want to get with it. And again, it works in lots of different styles. It's a very kind of sort of Baroque foundation behind all this, but people have done this kind of thing ever since. So you might want to have a play around with that and see where you get to with it. So harmonizing a descending scale in the bass using these what we call chains of 7/6 suspensions, where one of those 7/6s connects with the next, connects with the next, connects with the next. If you've enjoyed this video, let me invite you to the Music Matters website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. And if you want to know more about this kind of harmony and what are we on about with suspensions and what might we be on about with chords and with figured bass and all that kind of stuff, you might want to look at our theory courses, particularly our advanced theory course. So if you think you've got the kind of nuts and bolts of musical theory, you kind of know your keys and your time signatures and all that kind of stuff, and you're thinking, actually, this is the stuff I need to kind of get to grips with, well, that course is there for you. And it covers figured bass, harmony, melody writing, a little bit of analysis of particular pieces of music to help you think about what a composer's doing that will then empower you when you're writing your own music as well. So very kind of hands-on, practical kind of use of slightly more advanced harmonic thinking. It's there alongside all our other courses at www.mmcourses.co.uk.